what you say is going to be heard by everybody. All right, now let me see if I can get this on my laptop. It usually shows a live show pending. Oh, there it is right there. Okay, so now I can click on it. I don't know why I can't see this before that. And I've got to make sure I got the audio turned off. I do. And let me do a little test here. I see my hand and wait till it catches up. So I'm waiting for the delay. And let me just put a thumbs up here and see how long it takes to, boy, it's still not there. Yeah, come on, come on. Okay, we got 6 watchers already. We're setting up, everyone. There we go. I saw my thumbs up on my little laptop that I can use to monitor the chat room. And I see Glenn, good deal, is there already. And good morning, Glenn. And now we got Illinois Citizen. Hello. And all right, so we're getting set up. Is it 8 o'clock yet? No, I don't want to say too much before 8 o'clock because I said it was going to start 8 o'clock. So I'm going to wait to 8 o'clock. I was amazed that the setup worked the first time. So we got some time here to continue to get things set up. And we get this out of the way. And as far as the YouTube on the air, the Hangout on the air, I don't do these very often, so I have to kind of retrain myself on how to do it. I'm surprised this time I got it right the first time. And I like to do more of these, but like trying to find a good time to do them so that you get the advantage of being on or listening to a live show is the key. There probably never is a good time. And early in the morning, at this time, say it's 8 a.m. So in Asia, it'll be 8 p.m. That's okay. In Europe, it'll be about, I think, depending on where in Europe you are at, it'll be about 1 p.m. It's not a bad time. Unfortunately, 8 a.m., and this is Eastern Daylight Time, is 5 a.m. on the West Coast of the United States. So it's a little early. So it's hard to get everybody in the right time zone here. Yes, I'm in Pinellas, Florida, specifically Clearwater, Florida. I was born and raised in St. Petersburg, Florida. Okay, we're just setting up as people are tuning in, and we're going to try to start at 8 o'clock. I was amazed that my setup worked the first time, and we might start a few minutes early, at least with the introductions and everything. It's 7:56 right now. I'm going to give it a couple more minutes. I hate to start ahead of time because some people will, say, okay, it's 8 o'clock. I'll start listening at 8 o'clock and miss the beginning, which is where I usually tell what I'm doing in this show. As you can see, I've got my webcam pointing down to my desk, and I got my sheet here that we're going to use for questions for Doug. Doug is on the phone line here on my little Google Squawk Box. And so I'm going to go ahead and get started, plus or minus 3 minutes as of 8 o'clock. So I'm going to get started. And what this show is about is a few weeks ago, Retivas, I hope I'm pronouncing, sent me this radio. And what this radio is, it's a DMR radio, a digital mobile radio. And I had never even heard of DMR. And this one is programmed for the amateur radio bands. It's programmed to work on 2 meters and 70. I I knew that would happen, and 70 centimeters. It's based on a technology which was designed for businesses, for them to communicate with their field operators and things like that. And Retivus and several other companies have adapted this format for amateur radio use. So that was what I got. And I, as you should do, since I didn't know anything about it, I Googled it. I Googled DMR. I searched all over the internet for information. I watched a bunch of YouTube videos, which were pretty good, but I just was struggling. It was like, okay, I kind of know what this is, but no, I don't know. So I finally broke down and did a very short show, and asked for help because excuse me, I had asked for help locally through my amateur radio clubs and friends I knew, and there was really nobody that fully understood DMR. Some of them said, yeah, I've heard of it, but that was it. And there's, excuse me, I'm glad I'm getting my throat cleared before I go too far. Sorry about that. There's even, within 30 miles of me, there's probably a half a dozen repeaters, amateur radio repeaters, that will do DMR. And I tried contacting some of the repeater owners, and I got no feedback. So anyway, I was stuck. I was stuck. So I did that show, and I asked my viewers and subscribers if anyone could help me. And sorry, and excuse me 1 second. I got a sinus infection, and usually when I start talking in the morning, it acts up. Apologize for that. So Doug, who is in Texas, responded to my plea, and I've been working with him for 3 or 4 weeks now, and he's brought me up to speed. I was really brain dead when it came to DMR, and he's been very patient with me, to say the least. So once we got my radio working, or he got my radio working, then I decided, there's probably other people out there that are struggling with this, because the people I had contacted locally, some of them even had a DMR radio and they couldn't get it to work. So I thought, well, let me get Doug on my show, who's an expert at DMR, and let him answer some of the questions on the air that I had asked him. And then we'll kind of leave it open for questions from the viewers. That's what we're going to do. Again, Doug is in Texas. His call sign is KE5CDK. He is the president of one of the local amateur radio clubs, and he's also the editor of their newsletter, which I presented in one of my previous shows and gave you a link to his newsletters, which are very good about all subjects amateur related. Again, this is for amateur radio operators. All right. I'm going to get Doug on the air here so that I can give my throat a little rest here. Doug, are you there?
Hello, Tom. Yeah, I'm here. Go ahead.
Okay. I'm talking to Doug via, excuse me, I'm sorry about that, via my Google Home Assistant, I think they call it, Squawk Box. One of the features of this is you can make phone calls to anyone. You just give them the phone number and it calls them. So I like that. Anyway, here we go. Oh, a little other background about Doug and us setting up for the show is that once I decided to try to do this and Doug agreed, he got extremely busy at work. So we were going to do this show a weekend ago, and he had to work most of that weekend, and he's been working a lot of overtime. So we were going to try to do it during the week. Again, He was very busy. He got a little bit sick from working so much overtime, I think. And he worked this weekend. He worked yesterday, but he said, I'll help you out Sunday morning. So that's why we're here. So I've got these questions. These questions I took from the emails that Doug and I exchanged. And some of the questions are very basic because I took from when I first started asking him questions up to the latest questions I've asked him. And again, if you have a question of Doug, just put it in the chat room and we'll try to get to it. So here we go. Okay, Doug. Number one, how long have you been a ham?
I was licensed in 2004, so that makes 13 years. Man, the time flies.
Yeah, especially for me, now that I've gotten older, time is really flies. Okay, next question. How long have you been into DMR?
That's something else that's really flown. In fact, next month at a ham fest is when I bought my first DMR radio. That was 3 years ago.
Okay, so you've got plenty of experience with DMR radios.
Yeah, I've been playing with it quite a bit.
So how many DMR radios do you own and what are they?
Currently I have 3. I started with a handheld, an HT, the TYT MD380. And then I got to using it pretty heavily, and I said, you know, if this thing, I drop it or break it or something, I'm stuck. So I bought me a backup. I got 2 of those. And then not long ago, I got a mobile version, the TYT MD9600. So that makes 3 total.
Wow. A quick question of my viewers. Is everything coming through okay, the video and the audio? Okay. In my emails, I tried to relate DMR to trunking radio that similar to what I have on my scanner radios. Is that a good comparison or is it not?
Well, sort of. I can see where you would equate them to being the same. On the analog trunking systems, they use a few frequencies and use like a revolving axis to create more channels than they actually have frequencies. On the DMR, what we call Tier 2, which is what we use in amateur radio, uses 1 frequency pair and divides that into 2 time slots using, it's called TDMA, time division multiple access. So it takes that 1 frequency pair and chops it up into time segments and then dishes it out kind of like channel 1 and channel 2. And then it further divides them out amongst multiple talk groups. So you take 1 frequency pair and you can create many channels. Also, talking about Tier 2, there's actually 3 tiers to DMR. Tier 1, which was a simplex only, did not use repeaters at all. Tier 2, which is what we use in amateur radio, uses the TDMA and it also uses repeaters. Another thing that's out there is actually Tier 3, which is actually the trunking with DMR radio.
Okay, that clears it up for me. I know I was trying to relate it to trunking, and then I did. I think that made me even more confused. All right, the next question is, my understanding is that you have an amateur radio, you have to have an amateur radio license to operate a DMR radio in the ham bands. Is that correct?
Yes, you must have a amateur radio license to use any mode in the ham bands.
All right, the next question is, what are the advantage of DMR over just a standard analog radio?
One of them is the audio quality. It's very clear. You don't have statics and pops and whistles and a lot of the things you get with analog. In fact, if you just turn the radio on, and I don't know which one, I can listen and tell you which one it is, because one sounds like radio, the other one sounds like you're in the room with me. It's very clear. You get a slightly extended range also, and then when you reach that limit, it just drops out. Or with analog, you usually tell when you get to your limit, because you start getting statics and they start dropping in and out, and then they're gone. Also, whenever somebody keys their radio, the other station can tell who they are, because you can see the information displayed on your radio.
If you're going to use a DMR radio, is there any other things you have to do before you start using it?
Yes. You need to have a DMR ID. Even though you've got a license, the DMR utilizes an ID number, and that's so that you can send and receive voice messages, text messages. It will identify the station's source and where it's going to, and some other things. That's part of DMR, and it's free. You can get a DMR ID if you've got a amateur radio license by going to www.dmr-mark.net, because they're the ones that issues the numbers.
Okay, next question is DMR just in the United States?
No, DMR is used around the world. In fact, in Europe, they've been using DMR. Amateur radio have been using DMR for about 10 years. Here in the U.S., we've only been allowed to use it for about 5 years, so it's still fairly new here. I got into it 3 years ago, and it was available 2 years before that.
Approximately how many users are there in using DMR?
Oh, it grows every day. I looked about a week ago, and it was 87,606 users worldwide.
How about the U.S.?
It was running about 38,361.
So it's becoming more and more popular then.
Oh yeah, that was a week ago. It's probably 200 or 300 more now. It's still steadily growing.
Okay. One thing I was confused about, well, of the many things I was confused about at the beginning was, with your help, I got the radio here programmed to listen to DMR and listen to the local repeaters here in Pinellas County. But I wasn't hearing anything. And you mentioned something about PTT. What's that about?
Okay. On DMR repeaters, they use, like I said before, they use one frequency pair and 2 time slots, which means 2 people can talk at the same time and they don't interfere with each other because they're on like 2 separate channels. And then they're divided up into several talk groups. Well, to cut down on a channel that has a lot of heavily used worldwide on the system, and it's available on that repeater, but not used very much locally, it would dominate that channel. Nobody else could use one of the other channels because it's constantly in use. So they have what they call it. They list it as PTT, and what it amounts to is you have to key the repeater on that talk group, and then it tells that repeater you want to listen to it, and it opens it up so that you can hear what's going on that talk group for about 5 to 10 minutes. If you don't key it up anytime after that, you can hear the traffic coming to you. If you want to talk to them, you can. But if let's say you're just wanting to listen, and it's been like the 10 minutes, and nobody locally has keyed it up, then it will go back and mute it again, so that if somebody wants to use one of the other talk groups on that local repeater, they can. Or if you're wanting to continue, you would push to talk again. It would re-enable that channel for another 10 minutes.
Okay, since you mentioned the term talk group, could you tell us a little bit of what that is?
Yeah, a talk group is kind of like a chat room. You've got a frequency set up on that repeater, and they break them down into talk groups, and it's usually like how far out you want to talk. If you want to talk locally, just local people on that repeater, there'd be a talk group for that. If you want to talk around the state, there would be a talk group for your state. If you want to talk all over the U.S., there would be one for that. Worldwide, there would be one. And then as well as special interest groups, if you're wanting to talk about, who knows, sailing or something of that, there's probably a talk group for that in there. So you could go to something specifically that you're wanting to talk about, or at a region that you're wanting to talk about.
So you can communicate with people throughout the world with DMR. Is that right?
Yes. You can go to one of the worldwide channels. You can actually go to, because they don't speak English everywhere, they actually have a worldwide English channel. So if you're having, you're always getting somebody speaking French or German and you don't speak that, then you can just go to the English only room. But to me, that's part of the fun, trying to, struggling with a language and kind of maybe picking up a word or two and having fun. That's what it's all about. So they do have just plain worldwide channels that you never know who you're going to meet there or what language they're going to speak.
Okay, I've got a question in the chat room. What level of amateur license do you have to use to have to use DMR?
You can use it with the technician, which is the entry level.
Yeah, because it's mainly on 2 meters and 70 centimeters. I think you said that it's more on 70 centimeters.
Yes.
Okay, next question is, what are the basic things you have to set up to use DMR?
Okay, if you're gonna set up your DMR, you need to know what frequency that you're gonna be talking on, and which time slot, which is gonna be 1 or 2, and what talk group you're gonna want to talk on. And you set that up as a channel, and then you're ready to go.
And so the one thing I struggled with is getting those things in the right place in the right time. And I learned the term code plug. So what is a code plug?
Okay, code plug is a term. It's a Motorola term. That's where that came from. They said, okay, I'm gonna the file that my computer creates to set up the channels, and we're going to send it to that radio. That file itself, we're going to call it a code plug, and that's all it is. Just like if you had a Bofang radio, you create channels with some software and you send it there. Well, that file is a code plug. It's just their word for it.
Yeah, the one thing I noticed is the manual that came with this radio went through excruciating details showing you how to plug this radio, to program this radio. But it was excruciating, painful, and extremely confusing. But they also provide software, which is what Doug was talking about, that you can run on your PC to put all this information in and then send it over to the radio. And they provide this cable right here, which is a USB cable with some electronics in here and a very special connector. And so this comes with the radio, and it plugs on the side of the radio. I have the cover off of that plug connector right now. So there's the interface right there. And then you hook this up after you've used that program, which Doug did it for me because I was totally lost. Then you shoot over that file, which is that code plug, to the radio, and it's programmed and all ready to go. Now, Doug, can this radio be used for other things than just DMR and the amateur radio bands?
Yes, yes, you can use it anywhere that particular radio can transmit and receive. The one you have is actually a dual band. It does 2 meters and 440. The one I have only does 440 or 70 centimeters. But yeah, you can use it on any of those frequencies, and it will also do analog. So then there's lots of stuff on 2 meters and 70 centimeters. You could amateur radio, of course, commercial radio. It's actually a commercial radio, and you can still use it for commercial communications. Marine radio, weather radio, GMRS, FRS, this sort of thing. Anything that falls within those frequencies, you can use it.
Okay, let's see where we are on the questions. Where did you get information to build that code plug for me? Where did you get that information?
Oh man, that's what took a while. It takes a bit of detective work to find that out. There's a lot of DMR repeaters worldwide, and they grow and change all the time. And there's information all over the internet about it. And the problem is some of those sites are incomplete in their listings. Some don't update them often enough to show that, that maybe they changed some channels and talk groups around, so they're giving you old information. Some simply just don't give you enough information to program the radio. They leave something out, whether it's, what are the time slots on this repeater? What talk groups are available? And some only cover, even if they got good information, they may only cover their city or their repeater only. So, you want to find out all of them around you so you can hit them all, find out what's around you. But there are some good sites out there. DMR-mark.net has some information on theirs. DMRtexas.net has quite a few on theirs. CQDMRmap.com has quite a few on a mapping application on the internet. And we're starting to see on repeaterbook.com and radioreference.com, they're starting to add that information onto their listings now. They really weren't set up for the talk groups, and that was the problem. That they might tell you the frequency, and if you're lucky, the color code, something of that nature, but it wasn't complete. But we're starting to see that come about.
Okay, let me do a little update here for people that have just started watching. I've got Doug on the line. Doug has been my mentor for bringing me up to speed on DMR radios, and he's helped me program this radio here to work with DMR. And I've compiled a list of questions which I sent to him via email over the past few weeks, and I've kind of combined them, and that's what we're going over right now as an introduction into DMR. I also will, the websites that Doug just mentioned, I'm going to do a separate show offline, and I'll go through those websites and I'll give you the links when I do that show. And there's a bunch of very interesting websites associated with DMR. All right, moving on. Okay, after you get your radio program for at least one local repeater, what should you do when you're making your first call?
Okay, first of all, listen. And that's what we're taught, is to listen first. Make sure the frequency's clear, it's not in use. Don't just jump in there with both feet. Make sure, like it's your turn, that it's available. Then you want to, just as you would on the analog repeater, say your call sign. That lets them know, hey, you're here, you're wanting to talk, or you want to talk to somebody. And then also, I like to include the talk group that I'm talking on, because somebody could have heard it that's scanning by and they're not sure where they heard you. So I would say my call sign and what talk group I'm actually talking on, and that way they can back up and find you again. Then when somebody comes back to you, you need to remember to leave an extra long gap between overs, like 3 to 5 seconds, because you're on a linked system that's connecting you to the repeater, and the repeater to the internet, and the internet to other repeaters. And it takes a few seconds to make all those connections and then to disconnect those so that the other person can talk. And then lastly, don't overuse the repeater, because it's a shared resource with other users and they may be waiting their turn. So, and that's a hard thing to do. It's new and it's exciting, but you got to share these resources, because you may not even be hearing these other guys that they might be on another talk group, and you're actually keeping them from talking because they're on the same time slot you are, and they're waiting patiently for you to end your conversation so they can either continue theirs or start the next one. But most of all, enjoy the contact.
Okay. Suppose you had contacted somebody, you didn't know them before this contact, and you had a interesting contact. How would you find them again to try to talk to them some other time?
That can up until recently, that was kind of hard. You kind of said, well, I found them on this talk group. They probably frequent that one, and you have to kind of chance it and go back there again. But there's actually a way you can keep up with your friends and track them. A friend of mine, KE5CDK, made a website called DMR Track. And on there, you can put, like, I think up to about a dozen of your friends' call signs. And when you go there, you can see where they're currently at, what talk group they're talking on, or the last one they were talking on, and how long ago that was. So if you're trying to catch up with your friend, that's the first place I would go and see where they're at or how long they were on there.
Okay. Again, in another show, I'll show that webpage that Doug is talking about and those other ones. I noticed that there are 2 DMR systems. What is the difference?
Okay, actually, there's more. There are several DMR systems worldwide, but the main 2 here in the U.S. is DMR Mark and Brandmaster. Those are the 2 main ones that are used here. And the differences are, I call it command and control, or who decides where I can talk. DMR Mark is designed from the top down. The C bridge, which controls what talk groups the repeaters can have. Then the repeater chooses of those which ones they want to offer as channel, and then the user selects those channels to talk on. Where Brandmaster is almost upside down. It's designed from the bottom up. The user tells the repeater what talk group you want to talk to. Then the repeater requests the talk group from the master server, and then the master server makes the connection. So that's the 2 types of systems on DMR here in the U.S.
Okay. Just a reminder for people that are in the chat room, if you have a question of Doug, feel free to ask the question, and I'll try to get to it as soon as I can. So let's go on. The next question I had asked Doug was, what are the talks groups, and where do you find a list of them?
Actually, I took quite a while to find the talk groups. On a DMR Mark system, you really don't need to know all of them, because there's only going to be certain ones set up on your local repeater, and those are the ones you're going to choose from. But on Brandmaster, like we were saying before, you can tell it of all of the talk groups, you can choose which one you want. And there's over 800 of those talk groups on Brandmaster. And they can be found at brandmaster.network. And it's a little hard to find, but if you go to data visualization and then talk groups, then it will actually list all those for you.
Okay, a recent question I had of you, and you helped me set it up, is you can set up a database in your radio of users. And when the user comes on the air and the radio recognizes it, it will give you information about that user. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how you program it into the computer, into the radio?
Yeah, you're talking about the probably the contact CSV that you load into the radio. There's a database in the radio that you can load up, and it's part of that DMR ID that you have to have. Well, if you have the database of the DMR IDs in your radio, when somebody keys up their radio and you can hear them, you can also see their DMR ID number. But if you have the database in your radio, then you see their call sign, their name, their city and state and country, because it takes that database and displays that for you instead of just the number.
Okay. And for this radio, the Retevis RT82, originally the firmware would only allow, I think, 10,000 entries. Last month, they upgraded the firmware, and now it allows 100,000. And I think the database now is like, I think you mentioned it before, is like 88,000 users. Yeah,
it grows fast, and that's one of the things they've had to kind of do to keep up with it is in their firmware updates is find the space to store that ever-increasing database.
Yeah, it probably won't be too long before we exceed the 100,000. So you have to be a little careful what you try to load in, not try to load the whole database. I have the entire database loaded into this little radio of 88,000 users. So any user that this radio picks up, I'm going to get some information about it. Theoretically, that's how it's supposed to work. Anyway, let's move on. When using digital communications, how do you know you hit the repeater? And I use the term hit the repeater when you're trying to talk through a repeater. Sometimes you can't reach it, and you think you're talking, but it's not really getting to the repeater. How do you know you hit the repeater using DMR?
Well, on a DMR radio, it's actually talking to the repeater, and the repeater is responding to it digitally. So it will give you tones to let you know. Like if I'm keying up my radio to the local repeater, the first thing I would hear would be 3 high-pitched tones, which tells me the repeater is telling my radio, yes, I can hear you. Go ahead. You're talking just fine. But if I'm out of range and it can't hear the repeater respond to it, then the radio gives you a one long, deeper tone, and that lets you know that either you weren't able, the repeater was not able to hear you, or maybe somebody else was talking at the same time, and it keeps you from talking over them. So it basically means try again or get in a better location, something of that nature.
Okay, that's a good advantage of DMR to be able to determine whether you're actually hitting the repeater. I know I'm struggling a little bit with using this handy talkie and hitting some of the repeaters because I don't have any that are real close to me. So I've been getting that dull, long sound quite often. Okay, the next question. Are there other programs besides the one that comes from the dealer that can help you with programming these radios?
Yeah. There's obviously the one that comes with the radio is pretty good, but it doesn't usually have a lot of features to it. But there's some third-party people that have written some programs that does some of like sorting the frequencies or moving the zones around that you just literally could not do with the standard firmware. Looking for my spot here. Contact managers. That's one of the good ones that's out there, and he's updating it all the time. He's adding different models of radios, so there's a good chance if you don't have the Retrievus or the TYT, they support several brands, and it's real good because you can sort your channels so they're alphabetic or however you want to do it. You can move your stuff around. Works really good. The only drawback is most of the third-party stuff can't talk to the radio. So they're just manipulating the code plug, changing stuff around, and then you have to use the original software to actually send it to the radio.
Okay, I'm going to take a short break here. I've got an ambulance and a fire truck in front of my house. I need to find out what that's all about. I'll be back in less than 5 minutes. Stand by.
Okay. All right, well, he's gone. I think I'm still on here. Smoky Hill, it says most repeaters has a echo test feature, so you can hear yourself back to check your audio quality, and that's true. They also call it parrot or parrot test. The same thing. You talk into that talk group, and then you unkey it, and about a second later, it rebroadcasts it back to you so you can see how you sound.
Okay, I'm back. It turns out it's an elderly gentleman that lives across the street from me. He's blind and lives by himself, and apparently he's having some kind of health issues, and they're taking him away in an ambulance. So I'll have to check on that later and see how he's doing. Okay, where are we in the questions? Totally lost here. Sorry for the interruption.
I saw Smoky Hill made a comment, and I elaborated while you were gone.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Okay, I noticed on the Retrievus, this radio here, website, there is software to update the firmware. And I mentioned that before, that the update took, one of the many things it did, it took the number of contacts you could have in a database from 10,000 to 100,000. Are there other mods to the firmware besides the one from the manufacturer?
Yes. And in fact, one of them that's on the Retrievus is made by Ty, KE5CDK, which he also did it for my radio, the TYT MD380. He's been working on a few other models, but he actually worked with Retrievus. So when you go on theirs is his. But yeah, because these radios were made for commercial use, they lack many of the, we call them ham-friendly features that we're used to with the analog radios. And Travis Goodspeed was a hacker that first was able to get into the radio firmware and add some features. Others had contributed to the project, and again, notably Ty also made a bunch of the improvements on it. And he calls his version the Ty Tools, TOOLZ. And his adds many features on there. I always like to tell people when I'm talking about that, I say it makes a good radio a great radio because of all the extra features it adds. And it's very safe. That's usually the next thing they say, well, I don't want to brick my radio, make it like a doorstop. And you can't, all the information I've ever heard on that is you cannot brick these Chinese radios. Unlike, say, a Motorola radio where you could actually brick the radio, messing around with the programming, you would, quote, brick the radio where it would not respond to you, and you'd have to send it back to Motorola and have them reset it. The Chinese radio, if something goes wrong there, you just reflash the firmware again, or find another firmware and reflash that one.
So I guess one thing you should always do is download the present firmware.
Yes.
Yeah, or have access to it. Like you can get access to it from the Retivas website, so that if something goes wrong, like you said, you can reflash it back to the original firmware.
Yeah, and most of the manufacturers, if you go on their website, they have a utility to flash it, as well as the firmware which is the file, the official file. They'll have that on their website to do that with. Sometimes the hack software is just the firmware. Sometimes they also include a special loader, which either makes it easier or gives you other functions.
Now, when you, in a typical radio, when you change the firmware, do you lose all the setup you've done for contacts and repeaters and all that stuff?
No, not usually.
Okay.
Usually that's stored in an area, and the part that the firmware is in a different spot, so it does not rewrite those.
Okay. In some of our emails, you mentioned the term promiscuous or monitor mode. What are those?
Okay, monitor mode is a feature in the DMR radio. We've talked about talk groups, and they're kind of like partitions. You're in like a big room with partitions in it, so that you can separate conversations. And one of the ways they do that is the radio only listens to that talk group that you have it set for. But they have a mode called monitor mode, which says, knock down the partitions. I want to hear everything that's going on this frequency. And that's what monitor mode is. In most radios, unhacked, it will have some feature like that you can turn on. But usually when you hit the scan button to scan different frequencies, or you change channels, it turns that feature off. That's one of the hacks that they did. And they called it, renamed it Promiscuous. Once you set it, it will stick. In other words, you can hit scan, and it will scan all the channels you have in there, regardless of the talk group. You'll still hear them because it follows with you.
And that's just for a given frequency, right?
Right. Right.
So it's scanning the talk groups on a given frequency.
Right. So if I was on a repeater and maybe I was listening to Worldwide, and you came on there and you were on TAC 310, I would not normally hear you. You could be calling me. I never hear you because I'm on a different talk group. But if I had Promiscuous or the monitor mode, I'm hearing all the talk groups. I would have heard you.
Okay. The next question I had before was something we've already discussed, which are what other frequencies can you monitor with a radio like the RT82?
Well, like I said earlier, it depends on the radio. If it's a dual band, anywhere they'll tell you like from this frequency to this frequency. For example, yours is 136 to 174 megahertz and 400 to 480 megahertz, and that includes a lot of stuff. Ham radio is a lot of it. Commercial a lot of the times is in the 400 range. Marine radio, weather radio, DMR, FRA. There's a lot of stuff out there.
So you could actually listen to commercial communications, you know, for people that have these radios for their business. You could listen to them. Is that right? Yes.
And when they say commercial, that can also include fire and EMS. They use commercial radios. There's the police and fire can use a lot of different things digital wise, P25, Nexus, a lot of things, but some of them do use DMR, not widespread, but there are some areas that use it, and you'd be able to pick those up.
Okay, and that kind of leads into the next question was, how does scanning work in these radios compared to a scanner radio?
Okay, well, the first thing you would notice is when you hit your scan feature, there's an icon that would show up on your display. And that's about it. Unless somebody's talking, you're like, well, what's going on? I can't tell that it's doing anything. It's because it's doing it digitally. It's you're used to an analog. You're used to seeing the channel numbers, you know, roll around and flip, or scan groups changing. But on a digital system, it's kind of like you're just sitting still, and it's listening everywhere that's in it until somebody keys up, and then it shows you, hey, this is what you're hearing, and this is where it's at.
All right. The next question we've already talked about, which is when programming the radio, programming in the user database. We've already talked about that. So we'll go on to the next question, which is the question I had for you. I know there were a lot of variables, but what kind of range can you expect out of, say, this 5-watt radio that I've got?
Okay, RF-wise, it's about the same as analog. If you're on simplex with the little stock antenna, you're looking at about 1 mile to 2 miles, depending on terrain and, you know, buildings or whatever could be blocking the signal. If you're on simplex, meaning no repeater, just radio to radio with some kind of an external antenna, whether it's a mobile or something set up outside, you might get like 3 to 5 miles. If you're on a repeater, then it depends on how high that repeater is. If it's like, we call it a backyard repeater, meaning it's probably 50 to 100 feet high, not very high up, you might get 5 to 15 miles out of it. But if it's a big commercial tower, let's say 100 to 800 foot tall, you could get 15 to 50 miles easily, maybe even 100. Just depends on their repeater. But once you get into that repeater, then you can talk local or worldwide. It just depends on what talk group you're on.
Okay, that probably explains why I've been struggling hitting local repeaters, because I was using the built-in antenna, and the closest repeater is about 5 miles from me, and I was able to hit it if I got just in the right spot in my office upstairs. But if I sat down, for instance, I couldn't hit it anymore. So that kind of explains it. So I'm looking into using one of my external outside antennas and hook it up to this radio and see if I can get a little better distance. Okay, okay, so that's my case. I'm not quite close enough. What can you do if you're not close enough to hit a DMR repeater?
DMR repeaters are still growing. They pop up all over the place. A lot of them are being converted from analog to digital. You know, not only DMR, but some of the other modes, D-Star, System Fusion. There's a lot of digital going on out there. A lot of people experimenting with these new modes. But if one's not available, and you still have other options, you can use simplex. Simplex is fine. It works just like analog. Your range is dramatically reduced, but it still has its use. You can use them in like car-to-car caravans. Maybe you and your buddy is traveling, but you're in different vehicles. It works great for that. If you're at a ham fest, it works good for keeping up with each other. You're trying to meet your buddy. You're running late. You don't know where they're at. Call him on the radio. They're perfect. If you're into public service events, they're invaluable there because you're keeping the communications open and whatever event it is, moving right along. Another thing you can do is called hotspots. Simply speaking, they're a tiny simplex DMR device that works like a repeater. It's like your own small repeater. And they're connected to the internet, so once you hit your little pocket repeater, then you're out in the world. Hotspots are used with your radio to connect to Brandmaster servers or a few other servers directly. In other words, you're not having to go to the big repeater. You might also, DMR Mark does not allow hotspots, but some of the DMR Mark and Brandmaster talk groups are bridged together. So if you were on the DMR Mark and I had only had access to Brandmaster, there are some channels that they're linked together. For example, the USA 3100, they also refer to it as bridge. If you were on that one, then we could talk to each other, even though we run on the same system. All the TAC channels, TAC 310, 311, 312, all of those are bridged across to each other. And the hotspots, they range. If you're looking to get in a hotspot, they range from something that's plug and play to something you actually put together yourself. And you're looking at money-wise for something like that, something plug and play. Like there's an RF Shark that's real popular right now. Those run you about $250. There's some micro nodes that are out there. They're going to run you about the same price. But if you build something yourself, you can come out quite a bit cheaper. But again, there's a learning curve for that. You're taking something to work as a processor, first of all, whether it's a Raspberry Pi or a special controller board called a Blue DV controller board. Then you got to have a modem board. It's called a DV modem board or DV MMDVM, multi-mode digital video modem. And that's what actually converts the digital signal. Then you're going to have some software. The software is free. There's a couple of versions of that out there. There's KE5CDK has a Raspberry Pi image. And then there's another called PiStar that's out there. It's getting very popular right now.
Okay, sounds like there's a lot of things you can do with DMR. Have you found any problems using DMR?
No, not really problems. I consider them challenges more than anything. That's amateur radio. We solve challenges because there's a lot of things to learn. You're going to primarily be on 440, which whenever I got into it, I didn't really use 440 much. So I had to kind of learn how the propagation of 440 works differently than 2 meters. What are the repeaters around me that I can use? How do I get or make a code plug? Why isn't anybody hearing me? How does this radio operate? Where can I find the latest firmware? Yeah, there's all kinds of things. And how can I improve my station? I can't quite hit the repeater. What can I do? Do I need a better antenna? Do I need a bigger radio? So there's always something. And that's what we do as amateur radio operators. We're always experimenting, always trying something new and different. And that's why some of the guys, they see something new like this come out, they say, "Oh, that's not real radio. You're cheating, or you're using something different." I see that as like the dinosaur. What they're really saying is, why do things have to change? And that's because that's amateur radio. That's what we're about. We're into innovation, experimenting, and change, and that's amateur radio. That's what we do.
Okay, I think that's all the questions I have. If anybody else has a question for Doug, please put it in the chat. We've been talking with Doug. Doug is out in Texas. And one of the key things about DMR is finding somebody to help you get started. I was totally stuck. I was getting nowhere. I was about to contact Cortivus and say, "I can't review your radio because I can't figure out how to get it to work." And Doug came to my rescue, and he's been an excellent mentor, very patient with me, and got me over that hurdle of how this thing works, how to program it, how to use it. And that's one of the key things is when you get into new technology, you really need to find someone that's used to it, is experienced with it, like Doug's been into it, like I think you said 3 years. And that will get you over the hurdle, and then it starts falling into place, and it's not as difficult as you thought. And now you've opened up a whole new area of things you can experiment with on amateur radio or even just shortwave listening. So I want to thank Doug for his time. I know Doug, as I mentioned at the beginning, has been very busy at work and has given us opportunity to provide us these answers to my questions and hopefully given you some pieces of information to get you interested and into DMR. So thanks, Doug. And how are you holding up?
Well, I'm doing fine. And you do have a question up there, Lewis from East Los Angeles. Says he has a TYT 2017, and it's hard to program. I think he's wanting to know, is there an easy way to do it? Well, I've got a source for you. First of all, it's about the code plug. You should learn how to do a code plug. It's different. That's what makes it hard. But I watched a few YouTube videos, and that's how I learned how to do it. And then I got in there and I looked at a sample one, saw that that's how they had it laid out, and then I started working and building on mine. There's a lot of places, a lot of websites out there, particularly for your area, if you can find one, that may offer code plugs. You say you're in Los Angeles, there's a system out there called the Papa system. And if you look up their website, last time I was there, I think they had an extensive code plug. So you may can find one for your radio there.
Is that the same radio that's like the one I have?
Yes, it's the TYT's version of your Retrievus.
Okay, so a code plug for my radio would work on that radio and vice versa.
Yes, except then you would have channels for Florida repeaters.
Right, I understand that. Right. All right, I think that about wraps everything up. I think there was one more question from Lewis. And it says, does Doug have a website for DMR?
I have several, but not specifically just for DMR. I've got a club website, and there's a forum in there that I put information. You're welcome to come and join us there. It's nflarc.org, and you'll see a link to the forum, and I've got some information in there.
Okay, I think we'll call it a wrap. We made it at almost exactly an hour, and this worked out really well. It, of course, is really depending on having someone on that knows what they're talking about like Doug did. And thanks everybody for watching, and have a great day. Bye-bye.